with the most rampant and obvious accelerators, but for the sake of the mirage of so-called democracy, kept a secret distance from each other. Meanwhile, certain venal Trotsky individuals ended up with huge money laundering property portfolios, private city centre car parking sites, and even their own golf course from the coffers of Liverpool's public purse. Yet still Labour Hatton shouted power to the sleeping mass, whilst amusing shouting his arrogant catchphrase, "I bet you haven't got one of these," pointing to his seconder. Socialist my arse, Marxist more like. This thing exposes the true side of open all borders. So let's have a look at the Hatton link. It's YouTube again.
Hey, mate. Oh, Mr. Hatton. Have you got one of those watches? It's like a seconda. It's extremely accurate and shock resistant. But it's made of solid gold and it costs $6,000.
No, we haven't.
I have.
Secunda. Don't we have expensive imitations?
That was weird. The People's Poet. So Karl Marx, AZL, Anti-Zionist League. Karl Marx, Moses Mordecai Marx Levi, the 5th of May 1818 to the 14th of March 1883, better known as Karl Marx, was a 19th century Jewish political theorist and ideologue. Marx was born into a family of Jewish rabbis, a descendant of Rabbi Meir ben Isaac Katznellenbogen, and is best known as the father of communism. His Manifeste Kommunisten-Partei, or Communist Manifesto, and later Das Kapital, formed the core ideology of Bolshevism, the ideology that Lenin used to seize Russia in 1917. Lenin's Jewish Bolshevik regime murdered in excess of 66 million ethnic Europeans. Wow. So this thing exposes the true side of open all borders, Marxism, internationalism, Anti-Zionist League, scrapbook, cultural Marxism. Invented by the Frankfurt School, cultural Marxism deviates from the standard form of economic Marxism used to shatter Eastern Europe in that it attacks the traditions and culture of a people. It was specifically created to infiltrate Western Europe because the economic form of Marxism failed to preach the West. So, and didn't all the Jeremy Kyle masses follow? The ideology and objective is still the same, cultural Marxism. To understand this corrosive ideology, take time out and study what's in store for the future. It will give you answers to why our nation is under such chaos. I'd say all nations too. So what's this? Oh, cultural Marxism, well, we've read that. So, the cancer, next chapter. Since communism failed in the West, the Bolsheviks had to come up with another method to destroy the West. They introduced the Frankfurt School, and there are a lot of links on this, so I'll brush past it, but you can open them at your own leisure. And I'll provide the link in the video. So since communism failed in the West, the Bolsheviks had to come up with another method to destroy the West. They introduced the Frankfurt School in 1923 and produced cultural Marxism, which became the next wave of communist ideology for the West. To put this into perspective, academic Marxists took the ideology of Marxism and fused it with Jewish psychology, which comes from the minds and work of their Jewish brethren Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud. I think there was actually an interim, was a cultural Freudism, I think it was a Freudian Marxism, something like that, where they tried to implant into people's heads the idea of like to be communist. and that failed, so they came up with cultural Marxism. The fusion of the two Jewish minds resulted in what we are now exposed to today, and is the reason why the white race future is now in peril. These two Jewish minds, Marx and Freud, have advanced the toxic Zionist machine across the planet in the guise of so-called democracy, Israel being the only democracy. A vote for their sort of democracy is a vote for genocide, murder and Jewish Zionist tyranny. So it's a vote for genocide, murder and Jewish Zionist tyranny. Marxists/internationalists are the foot soldiers of capitalism. They are the mass consumers of globalization, engaged to fight the enemy of capitalism, which is nationalism. So the enemy of capitalism and globalism, which is communism, that enemy is nationalism. Capitalism finances the ideology through all the manipulating government quangos and trade unions. The unions then pay members subsidies to specifically Labour, the Labour Party, as well as all the rest of the political parties, to help retain the status quo. Psychological Marxism manipulates its puppet members to slowly dismantle industry under the banner of the unions, using fabricated or misguided moral causes to enable the Marxists to start class wars and cause cultural divides. Capitalism then vacuums up all the carnage into huge Jewish global companies, and the cycle goes on land grabbing, asset stripping, piecemeal by piecemeal, more for the Jewish Zionist pairs. I mean, the Jews are just laid back, aren't they, to just pip everything off. And as things arise, because they're all lawyers, they can wrap everything up in litigation until they basically strangle economically their opponent, or manage to incentivize their opponent. They just find methods to use legal constructs and legal loopholes, because they are aliens. They're foreign, and yet they manage to take over the indigenous. So the people who the land actually belongs to become removed from the land, and the Jews then become the landlords and bailiffs. So open borders Zio-Marxism, internationalism, is the acceptable face of Marxism in the West, inducing its followers from an early age with equality, offering the global village scam and a free meal to any follower, ultimately a sit-back, spliff up and peel me a grape utopia, a world of heaven. Is this for real? Do these gullible followers actually believe this? Of course they do read about it in the self-serving Marxist books of fiction that have cleverly been indoctrinated with using the Jewish Zionist-controlled national curriculum during schooling. Here, Jewish Zionism has had decades of a head start to pervert our children against white values. Marxists are told that the world belongs to everyone and there shouldn't be any borders, or that all borders should be open to all aliens. If that's the case, you are being manipulated by the ideology of Jewish Zionism, whose weapon is cultural Marxism. This only applies to white countries that Jewish Zionists are flooding with Kalergis, coloured immigrants, and try and apply the same method of liberal open borders to Israel and see how far it goes. Africa for the Africans, Asia for the Asians, and white lands for everyone. Open borders Marxism internationalism contributes nothing and only survives off a host. What people don't realise is that Shylock uses the public purse to hold back the nation's last line of defence, nationalism. Yes, we pay for our own downfall. One such Marxian social engineering technique is holding free annual or weekly arts and music events in Liverpool and around the country, cunningly funded from government quangos, One regular funded wolf cry is they'll love music, hate racism, and has unsuspecting youth follow as if it is all about music and culture, when in reality it is about gathering unsuspecting youth to support their one-sided issue. This is a hate group indoctrinating against nationalists and patriots, identifying them as racists and anti-Semites. They are a contradiction and are in fact anti-English and anti-white, and with their Love Music Festival of hate, the majority of youth are so hypnotised and blind to the evil underlying message they are being indoctrinated with. Using this wordplay misleads these unsuspecting followers. Even words like mono meaning singularly white or more ruthless words to that effect helps these Marxists define our culture as racist, when degrading our lost British spiritual bonding festivals, referring to them as being long gone. They use all these Marxian prejudged statements on the native to draw in support for their well-rehearsed displays. The youth are too distracted by the music or are too programmed by this politically correct regime to stand back and think about what they are doing to themselves by following this corrosive doctrine. If this inadequate symbolic queen is not a prisoner herself to the criminal Jewish banker families, who are by far wealthier than the symbolic mirage of our so-called sovereign, she can only ever be seen as a distraction and a traitor at least 5